Welcome back to Careers Explained. Today, we're talking with Anjan Mukherjee about his career path and current role. After getting his bachelor's degree from Davidson College in music, he worked at a variety of research roles, including as a research associate for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and as a research director for US Senator Chris Coons and for the League of Conservation Voters. He was then a partner at Tunlaw Strategies, a communications and strategy agency, before founding his own strategic communications firm, Tunlaw Strategies, where he's currently a principal. Welcome, Anjan, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Heidi. Glad to be here.
Can you start by talking about what your original career interests were in college?
Yes, absolutely. So I think like a lot of students, college students, and particularly Davidson students, I came into my freshman year thinking one thing, and then very quickly I realized it's not what I wanted to do. In my case, I came into college interested in biology, thinking I may be, taking the pre-med track in 4 years and sort of pursuing that avenue. And then I very quickly realized that that's perhaps not my biggest interest. I was always into music in middle and high school, and I was fortunate in high school to have great teachers and great peers who always encouraged me to, explore that creative side of my academic pursuits. And so I ended up majoring in music at Davidson. I loved the music program. I loved throughout my time in college, I learned that I wanted to be involved in music in some way. What that looked like, I didn't quite know, but I enjoyed doing it as as an academic pursuit. And then when it came time to, upon graduation, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to make music a sort of professional pursuit. I loved it as a hobby, certainly, and as an academic pursuit, but I did not know or think that I wanted to do it long term as a means or a source of income. So I was always sort of tangentially interested in politics, starting in high school, but I think it was the sort of 2008 election cycle where President Barack Obama first ran that, I think like a lot of people, certainly a lot of young people, the first galvanizing experience for what it means to be involved in politics. Certainly a lot of my peers and I were involved, at the sort of local level, trying to knock on doors and register folks to vote in that election. And so that was really an eye-opening experience for me for what it means to be involved in something like that. And so upon graduation, I managed to secure an internship on Capitol Hill here in DC with my hometown congressman. And it was a really wonderful experience. I didn't know what to expect. I knew I wanted to be involved in, and be there somehow and learn and kind of be a sponge. I was really fortunate that my congressman, who is now US Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, at the time was in a leadership position with the House Democrats. So he was effectively one of Speaker Nancy Pelosi's top deputies, and his job was in that role was to make sure that congressional Democrats who were in tough election cycles and tough districts, had all the resources to kind of tout their accomplishments, to understand what news was important in their districts, and just kind of make sure that they were fully equipped and had the resources to be effective public servants and to be great on the campaign trail. So I not only got to work with one specific member that was my hometown congressman, but I also got to see him work with and be a part of an operation that worked with so many members of Congress in all sorts of districts and all sorts of states. We're talking about people who were, who've been in office for decades, who know how to do this stuff, like the back of their hand, and first time members of Congress who got elected, in this big blue Democratic wave when President Obama got elected, and are trying to figure out how to navigate the craziness that is Capitol Hill and politics. And so it was really interesting to see how it's kind of like herding cats almost, to make sure that everyone has what they need. And that was really interesting. I got to have a really unique view of the legislative process, how the sort of communications infrastructure of a political office works, how they work with each other, both across the aisle and with people in your own party. All of that was very eye-opening, and I had a lot of really great, colleagues. They were really my bosses because I was an intern, but really great colleagues, many of whom I still keep in touch with to this day. And so that was really great. So that's, I think that journey from entering Davidson thinking, I'll probably do pre-med and see how that goes, to not do any of that, was the perfect journey for me, because I got to think one thing and try it out, didn't really like it, found my sort of, you know, larger passion of academic pursuit, and then I found what I wanted to do professionally. So I suspect that is not a unique sort of journey, and I think that's part of the wonder of college, of undergrad, is that you get to try things and see what you like and don't like. And so that's what happened to me.
Yeah, the beauty of trying things and discovering this isn't what I want, so I don't have to stay
Yeah,
here
yeah,
necessarily, and invest my energy in something that's a better fit, which for you career-wise happened to be starting with politics and in research roles. And you
yeah,
have a variety of different roles at different companies. Can you talk about what made you switch when you did?
yeah, absolutely. So one thing, just to kind of preface all this, is that in the political industry, and this is not unique to everybody, but it's, I think, a very common occurrence, a lot of the jobs and the kind of, uh, opportunities that come up are very reliant on the 2-year political campaign cycle. I've been a professional for 13 to 14 years now. I have never had a job last for more than 24 months. I just haven't. And that is completely normal. That is almost expected. So that, I think, is a wrinkle in all of this that colors how I certainly think about career growth and what it means to advance, to try new things, to move on from X or Y. So with that in mind, you know, from my internship on Capitol Hill, I knew, I was looking for a full-time job. I knew I wanted to do something in politics. I wanted to stay in it. I ended up interviewing for a couple of jobs on Capitol Hill that were sort of entry level press positions in various members of Congress's offices. I kept interviewing. I didn't get them. Kept interviewing, didn't get them, and then I interviewed for a job that was for opposition research, and I was like, I've heard of that term, but I have no idea what that is. But that sounds interesting. Um, and so I interviewed, and I got the job, and I quickly. It was one of these things where, like, within the first week, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And this is back in 2010, and I still remember this. This was my first week. There was a huge blizzard. It was the first week of February here in DC. Offices were closed for days, and snowplows couldn't. It was a whole thing. Um, so my first full week of work was not until like the third or fourth week of the job. But so I learned very quickly that I really like doing this opposition research work. It draws on the things that I liked about my time in college, which was, um, I had to learn to kind of read a lot of material really quickly and sort of digest it and analyze it and be able to, talk about it in ways that make sense. I learned how to write effectively, write clearly. I learned how, to kind of, again, think critically about what's important, what's not, what's true, what's not. Um, and one part of it that I didn't realize until later, but is very true, and I appreciate it, is that opposition research forced me to be creative, because at the end of the day, um, the most important thing that I learned about doing opposition research was that, at you can have, you know individual pieces of information about somebody or some subject or this and that, but the effectiveness of your job is how can you sort of put it all together in one cohesive narrative. How can you tell a story effectively? And so storytelling is something that I think is found in music, certainly, and I was able to draw upon that a lot. And I learned how to do that in my job, and I really enjoy that part of it. And so, cut to, years and years later, where I sort of have been able to draw upon that in my role as a communications professional. But so I started in opposition research. I really liked it. I grew in that path a little bit. I worked for, as you mentioned, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, where my job was to write opposition research books on Republican candidates for Senate, and that was a really exciting thing. I had never had that level of responsibility of something to that scale before, and that was exciting, terrifying, all the things. But I managed to work on some really interesting races. I worked on the Massachusetts Senate race in 2012, where Elizabeth Warren first got elected. I worked on a Senate race out in North Dakota where a Democrat, Heidi Heitkamp, won and held that seat for 6 years, which now, if you can imagine a Democrat holding an office, statewide office in North Dakota. But she managed to win, and she was a great candidate. And a few others as well. But, it was those experiences that I really cherished and wanted to keep doing. So the next step in my career growth, if I wanted to stay in politics, and specifically in research, was I was a research director for Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. He was running for his first full term. He came into the Senate when then Vice President Joe Biden went from the Senate to the vice presidency. And so he effectively filled Biden's seat and was running for his full term. And so I worked on his campaign as research director, kind of overseeing all of the research on his opponent, and sort of what we call self-research. He effectively turned the microscope on himself and said, find everything about me, tally up my record in office, my previous professional background, anything in my life that you think would be noticeable, or we should be ready to talk about all of that. So I did that for him. And then, I really enjoyed doing that, and I kept growing in the role of a researcher, as a political researcher. Over the next kind of few years, I did that for an advocacy group at the League of Conservation Voters, working on environmental policy. That was a really eye-opening experience, because I'd only worked with candidates directly. So seeing it from seeing the fight for progress from an organization side, fighting for a specific issue, was new, and I learned, how to think about things from a different perspective. We also worked in a bipartisan manner. I think this is a little bit back in time when there were a handful of moderate Republicans who were willing to kind of make progress on the environment, and so that was really great to see how a mostly progressive organization managed its relationships, sort of, how they worked with others to make progress. All that was great. And then I also worked for the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, which is the Democratic Party committee that works on state legislative races. And that was, talk about going from like 100 seats to there's 99 legislatures, 99, because Nebraska is a unicameral legislature. They only have one, but 99 legislatures and hundreds of seats. And so how do you possibly pick and choose what you focus on? So I learned a lot about how to kind of look at the bigger picture and prioritize, and sort of put your resources to where you think you get the biggest bang for the buck. That was also the first job where I was in a managerial role, and I learned how to manage staff, and I learned how to sort of be a member of senior staff in a way that I hadn't been before. So from a career standpoint, that was a really sort of pivotal moment for me, and I was really glad to do that. And after that cycle in 2018, where for Democrats it was very fruitful. It was the sort of backlash to the Trump presidency. It was that midterm in 2018 where across the board at all levels of the ballot, the Democrats kind of it was a huge blue wave, and so a lot of candidates who won handily would have otherwise won close races, and a lot of candidates who won close races would have otherwise not won. And so That was, really gratifying. After that, I moved on to work on a presidential campaign, which was really incredible. I worked for Senator Amy Klobuchar's presidential campaign in 2019 and 2020. Um, as you may recall, there were 20, I want to say it was 26 Democrats who ran for president that cycle, maybe 25 or 27, but it was a lot of people, a lot of people. And I think, you may see that on the Republican side this year. We sort of saw it on the Republican side in 2016, when Trump finally came out of that primary. But it is a lot of people. So how do you sort of stand out among all the noise? How do you sort of make your case to the people, without sounding like every other candidate, but also not being, totally crazy where no one takes you seriously. So I thought that Senator Klobuchar came to the race with really impressive accomplishments in the legislature, well respected in her state. I mean, she still has enormous popularity in her home state of Minnesota. So to learn from somebody who has done that work and has sustained it and has gotten the results and the feedback from her constituents in that way, it was really interesting. And it's for somebody like me. I have worked in politics for, at that point, a decade, had kept advancing and had gotten real, great experiences. But then to work on a presidential campaign, I was, it's one of the things where I stepped back. I had to say to myself, oh, this is a really cool experience. I need to enjoy this. So that was really gratifying to have the opportunity to do that and to learn from that and to work with a lot of great people. Here's the chain of events in the course of a week that kind of changed everything for me. March 2nd was a Monday. Senator Klobuchar dropped out of the race on March 2nd, which is a Monday. She flew to Texas to do a rally with Joe Biden and endorse Joe Biden for president. It seemed it was coming down to, it was basically going to be Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders was the last two, and I think people were kind of coalescing around them. So she flew down, endorsed Joe Biden for president. Monday, March 2nd. Tuesday, March 3rd, it was Super Tuesday, big voting state, big voting day. 10, 12 states voted. And so and Joe Biden, did really well, all that stuff. That's Tuesday. The next week was when all the COVID, like all the stuff started to lock down. The NBA shut down, the NCAA shut down. I mean, Broadway theater, like you name it, everything was shutting down. So over the course of about a week and a half, I went from working at a full paced presidential campaign to sitting at home being like, what the hell is happening? And so that was a very abrupt shift. But I think that was the case for a lot of people too. And in the midst of sort of everything happening in 2020, after the presidential campaign ended, I went to work at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, working on what's called independent expenditure races, where the committee cannot coordinate with the campaigns or itself directly, but it sort of makes educated guesses on where they think they can invest money and resources to kind of do advertising and polling to help win elections. So I was a senior advisor for research on that side. I kind of oversaw a 9-person research operation there, make sure that our job there was to make sure that all of the pollsters had accurate information, that all of the sort of media firms making the ads had accurate information so that their ads wouldn't get taken down. I mean, a big part of how all this works is that you say something about your opponent, and if it's not 100% true, they can call the TV station and say, hey, this is like they're lying about me, like you got to take this down. And so that's really embarrassing. You don't want to get a letter from a lawyer saying you didn't say the correct thing, and the reason ended up being because you didn't proofread your, ad script, right? So a lot of that. The DCCC ended up spending about $90 million in advertising and polling and sort of all their work, which is not a small amount of money. So my team oversaw all of the information that went out in that effort. Everything had to be correct. A lot of the work I did was making sure that the lawyers who approved all of our content before it went out wouldn't have problems with how we characterize things, or how our information was right. So a lot of nerve-wracking moments for sure, but ultimately we ended up winning or retaining the majority in the House of Representatives, and so that was worth it. So that was my kind of a decade-long career in research, and in 2021 I didn't really know that I wanted to continue doing research sort of in the same way. I felt like I'd done it for a while, felt like I had accomplished a lot of the things that I had set out to accomplish. In terms of career growth, I had sort of worked at the highest levels of the profession. I had managed staffs. I'd done a lot of the things. And I got an opportunity to sort of transition from strictly political research to taking a slightly broader view of what strategic communications is and looks like. I had the opportunity to join a boutique firm here in DC as partner, and that was a wonderful experience for me. I did that for 2 years with my former business partner, who taught me a lot. I learned a lot from him about not only how to do this work as a consultant. I learned how to run a business. I learned how to grow a business. I learned how to think about take the long-term view on how to serve as a client. And so all of that was, really, really exciting to kind of go through. And now and earlier this year, I had an opportunity to branch out on my own and kind of start and run my own practice. And so that's what I do today.
Awesome. And so throughout that path of 10 years of research before you switched, some themes that you talked about were storytelling, as well as kind of seeing the bigger picture at times and knowing where to focus your energy. And so can you talk about how that translated, of those things that you enjoyed? How did that narrow down where you wanted to work at a communications firm?
100%. And that's a really great question, because I think I hadn't thought about my career growth in that way until like pretty recently, actually. I think a lot of the career growth I had gone through, I hadn't prioritized sort of, is this something that will, make me happy? That's not to say that I wasn't happy. I enjoyed all my, experiences, but it was not a deciding factor in how I chose to pursue jobs. I pursued jobs because I thought there were great opportunities to learn, to grow in my role in my career. But what drew me to join my old firm, Hone Strategies, as partner, and then kind of branch out on my own, was that what I really enjoyed about doing the work was the personal interactions. Was sort of meeting people face to face and kind of like, doing the work up close and personal. I'll give you one example. One of the races I worked on in 2022, that I was really proud of, was to elect the now governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs. In my role on the campaign, I was a communications consultant and the senior advisor to her. I ended up basically, drafting and overseeing the implementation of the campaign's overall communications plan. I was in charge of prepping the candidate for interviews, for speeches, for forum. I mean, like, you name it. So, and I found that she and I we work well together. I think we had a good rapport going. So that helped me do a good job, and I think she appreciated the way that I would kind of work with her and brief her and prep her. So that was really good to know that that relationship was there, and that certainly was not unique to Governor Hobbs. It's I had that experience and those interactions with plenty of other candidates too, and so I found that when I was able to kind of spend time with somebody and kind of learn about them by being around them, I was able to better understand how to effectively tell their story to to the public, to the voters, to the media, whoever. Um, so and that's not something that I would have necessarily done in my research capacity, because ultimately the research teams aren't always the ones sort of public facing, right? Like, researchers role is ultimately internal facing. We produce documents, we produce information for internal purposes that is ideally used to make external facing decisions and strategies. So it was great to be on the public facing, external facing side of all of this in a way that I hadn't been before. And I found that part of that was that I was able to kind of effectively be a better storyteller in ways that were more directly impactful for my clients that way.
And can you describe to someone what a communications strategy firm does broadly?
100%. So I will kind of preface this by saying that um, I have never, in my time being a communications consultant and professional, which sort of in this iteration has been about 3 years now, I've never had a single boring day. That doesn't mean that things were always, rosy and hunky dory. Like, there were a lot of stressful days, but there was not a single boring day, which I think honestly is great. Um, I don't do well with boredom, and so um, I appreciated sort of not having that be a part of my job. So, what does a communications professional do, and sort of like what do I do in my role here? So, on any given day, I am working with clients on a number of things. So, for example, if I'm working with a political campaign, it could be helping them to launch a campaign and all the mechanics that go with it, making sure that there's press coverage, making sure that the candidate is prepped to give a great launch speech, and sort of all that work that goes into that. I could be helping a um, private organization, nonprofit, whoever, kind of think about their branding, think about how they want to, show themselves to the public. How does that, impact how their leadership interacts with their staff? How does that impact how their leadership brands themselves? Um, eh, or I could be helping somebody, prep for a big debate and all the work that goes into that. Um, and I could end the evening, doing some light reading on what's happening in the news today, this week, so that I can be better informed to help my clients understand the world a little better. One of the things I do right now is I work with a client where part of what I do is just on a regular basis, I brief and update them on what's happening on Capitol Hill and just in the White House, within the Supreme Court, just what's happening in politics in general. And as you can imagine, there's always a lot of things happening. So um, to get to your earlier question, how do you sort of separate the signal from the noise and sort of find the important things to focus on and to brief somebody on? That's part of, I think I draw from the storytelling part of it. It's not directly correlated, but I think it's important to kind of understand what is important to focus on, what you want to convey, how you want to convey it, how can you best convey information so that the person who's receiving it understands it and can use it for their purposes. Like, I wouldn't just tell a client, hey, these are the 100 things that happened in the news this week. I would say, here are the top 10 things you need to know for your interview with MSNBC tonight. And then maybe if they want to learn more, I can say, great, here's 15 more things that may be helpful for you, just as as an important news item to know. So sort of being trusted to weed through all of the noise and kind of understand what's important for them to know comes again from those personal interactions, from understanding what's important to them, how they want to receive information. And so all that is to say, every single day is different.
Every day is different, and you listed a variety of different
Yeah.
types of clients, types of projects. Can you give an example of maybe one of the more common problem or question that clients come to you looking for help with, and give an overview of what the process looks like from whether you're reaching out to them, they're coming to you, and from there,
Yeah.
what's the overview?
Absolutely. So I think one common misconception that clients have, and this is certainly not unique to political candidates or political clients, but oftentimes people don't know what they don't need. And so, I will have clients come to me and say, "Hey, it would be great if we did X, or why don't we do Y?" And it can be anything from, let's write an op-ed, or let's do an event where we call out XYZ, or let's go on TV and talk about this. And I part of my job is to give them honest feedback, right? And say, like, that sounds great, but I am not 100% sure that that will advance our goals, which we have all agreed upon, um, for these reasons, right? And I think a better use of your time and my time would be to do this instead, or how about we think about achieving our goals differently? And so those conversations do happen a lot, and they're almost never from a bad faith place. It's just, I think people have an idea of what communications is, and sometimes it's I think of it like a Venn diagram, right? Like, there's an overlapping part where, yep, you want this thing, I think it's a great idea, let's do it. And then there's the sort of parts where they want something, and I don't think it's in their best strategic interest. So having those conversations is, I think, I have learned how to have those conversations um, tactfully. I learned how to have those conversations effectively. It doesn't always mean I'm successful. Do I end up drafting op-eds that don't necessarily get placed? Of course, right? But that's part of the job. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I have, is that people don't know what they don't know or don't need, and it's my job to explain to them why I think that is not the best course of action.
So process-wise, start by understanding the customer as well as their interests on really that interpersonal level.
Absolutely,
Then
absolutely.
understanding together what are all the things that we could do right now, and here's why we think these are what you should focus on. And from
100%.
that point, how long is a typical engagement with your, and I'm sure it varies, but on average, with your
Yeah.
client, how long are you working with them?
So it does depend, and it does vary. I would say some clients, I am on their teams sort of indefinitely. That I'm just a part of their broader team, and I help them sort of week in, week out, month in, month out with any number of things. Going back to some of the items I listed, right? Be it sort of brand elevation, sort of helping them be better public speakers, all of that stuff. And then there's sort of shorter term commitments, like campaign launches, right? That's a very specific thing that you work to build up towards, and then it happens, and then it's done. Um, I think so. It really does depend, and I think frankly, that's the beauty of what I like to do, is that I get to do things that are both short term and long term, and I get to work with the clients and sort of work with them to figure out what they need. It's not me saying, you need a 2-month thing and that's it, and it's not them saying we need a 2-month thing and that's it. It's us talking about what you need, what you don't need, how you want to get there, and then me suggesting, great, here's the path that I suggest, and then hopefully they agree. So the short answer is, it just depends.
And you had a great explanation of the types of roles or responsibilities you might be doing with a
Yeah,
given client. Can you break that down into a week? Again, it varies a lot in your role, but on
yeah.
average, how much of your week is spent researching, like you mentioned, at night, or in meetings with clients? Kind of a breakdown of time spent in different types of roles and how social those are.
Sure, sure, sure. So I'll kind of break this down into three overall categories of engagement from my end. The Um, the, the the level of engagement where I have the least interaction with the client directly is where I'm kind of doing my own due diligence, doing my own research, catching up on my own reading to be better informed. Um, and part of my job is just to make sure I know what's happening in the news. I haven't counted. I probably read 200, 300 news stories a day, just like that's just how it is. And which sounds ridiculous, but that's just a job. And so I think there's a level of being prepared that is just me, that's not necessarily for a specific client. Maybe it is, but it's a level of just I want to be informed, right? So that's one level of it. I probably, I read the news stories throughout the day, just kind of like as I see them pop up on social media, on news sites, all of that. Um, but that I would say that probably takes up a couple hours of my day. And I can do that when I am, you know, taking a break from meetings and like at the coffee shop for an hour where I just like sit and like read and catch up on my reading. I can listen to my podcasts when I'm like, working out or going for a walk or whatever. So it doesn't have to be just I'm at my desk and, holding a physical newspaper. So I enjoy the kind of leeway to kind of get information in on my own time that way. Um, the next level of engagement, I think, is the kind of weekly, I think, is a good sort of barometer. Weekly calls, check-ins, just a regular check-in with the teams that I work with. This is their like regular all staff meetings. Um, and that is more or less it's kind of top line. Here's what everybody's doing. Here's what we're working on. Here's some big picture stuff. My role in that, obviously, is to give an update on sort of what my projects are, how I am doing on those, what else I'm thinking about, all that stuff. But those meetings are, like I said, weekly. So I I prepare for them, but it doesn't take up every single day of my time. And then there's the specific projects that I'm working on. That's the biggest level of engagement, and that I think has the biggest variance in terms of who or which clients engage in what ways. Um, Both the blessing and the curse of doing this work is that I had clients who are at all levels of engagement, and frankly, like that's great for me. I enjoy it. I have clients who are very hands-on, who want to know everything about the process by which I am going to accomplish the tasks that they want me to accomplish. Um, and there's clients who don't need that level of check-in, who just want to know when something is done, and that's great.
Thank you for that breakdown of levels of
Yeah,
engagement. And on
sure,
that
sure.
highest level of engagement on the specific projects, um,
Yeah.
can you give an estimate of percentage of time let's use the example of kind of the clients with the higher engagement. What percent of that project allocated time for them is spent in calls with them or on your own?
So I would say on a weekly basis, one of my more involved clients, I'm probably on calls 2 to 3 hours a week. Honestly, like that's not that much. Um, that being said, this is again to go back to the sort of we're on a 2-year campaign cycle. This is the summer of what we call the off year, right? The year before the actual election, and it's usually the kind of most lull we have in our busyness. So right now, that is what my schedule is. Um, September, October of an election year. I mean, I, I'm on calls from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. And it's just how it goes. That's a little bit exaggerated, but not entirely. Um, and then throw in the fact that sometimes, and this was the case with me, you have clients across time zones, and so I was working with clients who are on Pacific time and who work campaign hours on Pacific time. So you can imagine it gets a little hectic that way. But all that is to say, right now the kind of breakdown, it's probably 2 to 3 hours a week on on calls and meetings per client. That'll certainly increase, but I'm hoping it doesn't increase as crazily as it has in the past.
Very helpful. So right now you're in a lull. There's still
Yeah,
definitely time spent with clients, especially those who want higher
yeah,
engagement. very much varies and can be
Yeah,
much education.
yeah, for sure.
Finally, for someone who's hearing this and says, that sounds awesome. I love storytelling. I love building relationships with
Yeah.
clients, all the factors you mentioned. What advice would you give for someone who says, I'm interested in communications?
So I think there's two things that I would suggest. The first is um, to always not be afraid to like reach out and make a and try, at least try and make a professional connection. I know it can be awkward. I know it can be scary. Believe me, I know it can be awkward and scary. Um, I think that I mean, okay. Here's what I'll say. I remember very clearly, even from when I was an intern, when I was starting an entry level job in politics. I remember very clearly the people who took their time to like help me um, polish up my resume, understand how to craft an email, like all of the things that I certainly take for granted now, but I, I may not have known how to, operate in this world like when I was 21, 22 years old. Um, I'm very grateful for and remember the people who like helped me and were patient with me and sort of helped me grow. Um, and I try to do that with folks now. And I hope I do that, but that's my goal is to kind of, understand that, my base of knowledge and experience is not their base of knowledge and experience. And if they want to get to where I am, how can I help them? So one, don't be afraid to like reach out, right? And just say like, hey, I'm so and so. Wanted to talk to you about XYZ. I see you have this experience. I would love to learn more. Fantastic. Um, as an aside, this is a pet peeve of mine, but I would love to just share it for you and your audience, which is if you're making a LinkedIn request and you don't know the person, include like one line of a personalized message. The like, I want to connect with you on LinkedIn and I don't know you. I don't like it that much. So it just feels like one iota of effort goes a long way, I think. And so that's my kind of, you know, old man rant there. But so one thing is like, don't be afraid to reach out. And two, I think um ask a lot of questions. Like ask a lot of questions. I'm a firm believer that there's no dumb questions. Um, if you don't know something, I would be happy to like teach you and like learn, help you learn. Um, so ask all the questions you want. You may realize by asking questions that you don't want to do communications, and that's fantastic. Do something you want to do, right? Or you may realize, yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. In which case, great. There's so much more you have to learn, and that's wonderful. So I just think that my experience coming into this world and sort of growing in it and advancing in my career has been possible because I had people along the way who were patient with me, who answered my questions, who didn't treat me like, I was bothering them by asking these questions, and who kind of um, helped me, learn in a really helpful way. So um, and again, I try and sort of embody that and kind of help folks who are coming up in the industry that way. Um, so that's my advice.
Reach out and hopefully you find someone who's patient and willing to help like you. And if not,
Absolutely. Ask a
ask.
lot of questions. I can't emphasize that enough because I think, you know, um, so many times, I don't think you have to, have a list of 10 questions that you bring to the table, but enough of a curiosity where I feel like you are interested in what you want to learn about. And I think that frankly goes a long way.
Thank you for that advice and for sharing your career path and those
Of
insights. It was
course.
a pleasure.
Of course. Happy to talk to you.